You have to be an idiot to game at 4K. 1440p is the sweet spot. You don't need 4K. No competitive gamer would ever buy a 4K screen. You guys have probably heard a lot of this, and there's a lot of truth to that, especially the 1440p gaming is the sweet spot, and I agree with that. But I think that a lot of people haven't updated their thinking on that since technologies like DLSS and FSR have started being added to like not only a lot of games that didn't launch with them, they're being added in as later on, but a lot of new games are launching either with FSR or DLSS or both. And Intel's going to be pushing its XeSS technology fairly soon as they start to launch their GPUs. And if you haven't heard about that, I've done other videos covering that, but that's going to be a very strong DLSS competitor in my opinion that does not require an RTX card to run since it has a DP4A fallback that can be computed on GPUs that, you know, don't have the tensor cores. But anyway, I don't want to get off track on that topic. Let's stay where I'm saying. So 1440p, I agree it's the sweet spot, but does that mean you have to buy a 1440p monitor? Now, a common like Google search question that I've seen pop up in all sorts of PC building forums and everything is, does a 1440p image look better or worse on a 4K screen compared to a native 1440p monitor? And the conventional wisdom has always been that it will look better on the native 1440p monitor, and it will look worse if you try to game on a 4K screen at a 1440p resolution. And that certainly used to be true. But I actually don't think it's true anymore because of technologies like FSR and DLSS. Because a 1440p image, and I've tested this out on my OLED over here. I love the LGC one, by the way. I know I say that in like every video where it comes up, but man, I love that thing. Anyway, so on that screen, I could render the game at 1440p in a letterboxed native 1440p format. Or I could render it at 1440p and then resolution scale it up using FSR, or when I had my RTX 2070, I could use DLSS, and actually fill the screen. And I feel like the image is generally better with the upscale, because it used to be true that you would get this more blurry output to an image when you're upscaling it at a non-integer scale of its resolution. In other words, like 720p can be perfectly doubled to 1440p, and so the edges of the pixels still look sharp. But if you're multiplying your pixels by a non-whole number amount, then each one doesn't fill a perfect pixel, right? So it ends up looking kind of blurry and just not as sharp as it should be. At least, again, that used to be the case when you would just lower the resolution of the game without using any kind of a good scaler. And it would look bad. But with FSR and DLSS, they can actually sharpen the image and not get that blurriness to them. And in the case of technologies like DLSS, which has some temporal data to be added back in, as well as some AI algorithms assisting with the upscale, they can actually reconstruct and add in detail and display it on the 4K screen that didn't even exist in the 1440p image. So, is it still true that you'd be better off gaming at 1440p on a 1440p monitor rather than a 4K screen? Well, before we get too hung up on that, I think we should talk about a few other things. For one thing, you should really consider, like, what is your use case for gaming? Because if you are really more of the esports player kind of person, I do think it can make sense to buy more of a 1080p or 1440p extremely high refresh rate display and target that. However, 4K monitors are now starting to push into the 120 and 144 hertz territories. And for example, my C1 OLED over here goes to 120 hertz. And due to OLED's really fast pixel response times, as well as input latency, I honestly feel like things feel sharper, quicker, less latency, and less motion blur on that than they do on my 144 hertz screen that I have over here, which isn't OLED. So there's a lot of things that go into how that feels. So is it actually possible that a competitive gamer might want a high refresh rate 4K monitor? I mean, it's not something to completely rule out, although like I said, I still think if you're just super competitive, sticking to like the 1440p or 1080p high refresh rate might make the most sense. But if you're like me and you play a variety of things, I do play very competitive games, and when I play online, not that I have the time to dedicate to be like pro level these days, but I do want to win, right? I want the advantages that I have, and I do take it pretty competitively. I can do great on this screen, and usually I will turn down the graphics settings and the resolution scale, and it will still look fantastic on that screen, especially in games, like I said, that have a good upscaling technology. And so, yeah, I mean, it's really something to think about, because in the past, a lot of times people would say, when you're building your PC, when you're planning your GPU purchase, you should be doing it based on the resolution and frame rate and type of game that you want to run. And they're not wrong, but I think that advice does need to get updated a little bit for the modern situation with FSR and DLSS just getting added to more and more games, and those technologies will continue to improve. We'll see more competitors like XeSS. However, let's jump into another thing, which is just that, okay, all of that being said, I had an RTX 2070, I was playing at that, it was playable, I loved the monitor upgrade, but I went ahead and spent a ridiculous amount of money on an RX 6800 XT anyway to drive that better. And honestly, if I had had more money, I would have spent even more money on maybe a 3090, okay? Which I think right now is your best 4K, but 4K monitor GPU. However, again, you're paying a ridiculous amount of money for that. So, like, I can see myself buying the like high-end or highest-end GPU like every GPU cycle now that I have a 4K screen. But I think what that comes down to is, man, once you experience how good a really high-end 4K high refresh rate screen, especially OLED, man, that's crazy. Once you experience how good that is, it's so hard to turn down the settings, even though you can, and it still looks really good. And like I said, I still think turning down the resolution scale on here to match the resolution on my other monitor or a letterbox version, I still prefer, I still prefer doing that on the screen. But man, do I love just maxing out the settings. And you know what? It's just something to think about. It could start to kind of ruin your budget if you just get kind of spoiled by that. And I used to be a skip a GPU generation and buy like the upper mid tier. Like I went from a GTX 970 to an RTX 2070. And had I not bought this screen, I probably would have waited until I bought like a 4070. But I got that screen and oh man, I just had to upgrade that GPU. So keep in mind that, as good as it might be to play 1440p on something like that, you might also want to upgrade anyway. And the little bit of justification I give to myself on this is, I know a lot of people with other hobbies besides PC gaming that will drop way more money than I do on a computer build or a GPU upgrade on all sorts of things. Like try getting into cars, okay? My stepdad's into cars, and let me tell you, he wastes a lot more money on that than I do on my PC gaming. So, hey, if you're looking for justification for why you just spent $1,200 on a GPU and another, $1,000 on a new screen, it's cheaper than a new car. I hope you guys have an excellent day.